Well, if you're ready, brothers and sisters, we're going to be in Genesis chapter number 10. And as I was developing this teaching today, I wanted to really drive home a few points, basically two main points that we're going to be focusing on today. And so today's teaching is developed to show all people that based on what is written, our ancestry goes back to basically three families. And as we know already, these were brothers. Ham, Shem, Japheth were brothers. And because they were brothers and all people ancestry goes back to these three brothers, then that biologically make all men relatives in the human sense of the word. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter what ethnic origin you hail from. It doesn't matter what your pigmentation or the texture of your hair is, because it is very clear that all mankind was wiped off the face of the earth, and Father repopulated the earth with these three brothers. I was thinking today also that a big trend that I see occurring more and more is searching one's genealogy, identifying the DNA, the origin, people trying to find where their ancestors were from. And the intent is to try to identify some kind of identity from an ethnic origin. And most people, when they do genealogy or DNA testing to look up their ancestral background, will find that there is multiple ethnicities that are incorporated in themselves as an individual. And 9 times out of 10, the focus sometimes is not on the major, but on the minors. So if a person have 2% of Jewish DNA, that becomes a big deal when it's a small percentage of one's DNA. You follow what I'm saying? The other DNA or identifiers doesn't necessarily, it may be surprising to some degree, but the fact of the matter is that your genealogy is not going to take you back to Ham, Shem, or Japheth. Why? Because the genealogical searches don't go back that far. It's very difficult for a person to take one's genealogy back to that degree. Another thing is when it comes down to ethnicity, because people want to identify with some form of ethnic group. And when it comes down to the Bible, whatever ethnic group you identify with, its origin is found in Ham, Shem, and Japheth. It all goes back to those three brothers. And so no matter how you cut it, no matter how you look at it, from a biological perspective, we're all relatives. Now, for the believer doesn't necessarily focus on its biological origin, because our identity is in Messiah. For the believer in Messiah, it doesn't matter what your biological ethnic origin is, because our identity is hid in Messiah. Genesis 9:18, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark. Now we're jumping back to make this point because we didn't focus on this then. I was looking at some other things, but in Genesis 9, verse 18, and the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. Verse 19, these are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. Of these three brothers. So it doesn't matter if you are African, if you are Asian, if you are Australian, if you are Hispanic, if you are European, it doesn't matter what your ethnic identity or what continent you hail from or what country or what tribe you associate with. We are all the descendants of brothers. As men, we human beings all trace our roots back to who? Shem, Ham, and or Japheth. We all trace our roots back to one of those brothers. As believers in the Hebrew Messiah, we trace our roots back to who? Yeshua. Now, here's where it becomes somewhat problematic because you will find that people identify more with their ethnicity than they do with their Messiah. This is a fact. And because of identifying with ethnicity, one could harbor prejudice and racism in their hearts. You see, it's very difficult unless you have self-hatred. It's very difficult to hate your bloodline. The bottom line is with what Father did back in Genesis chapter 2, he erased primarily the bloodline of all men and began again with Adam, his wife, and the sons that he had prior to the flood. So all bloodline goes back essentially to not Adam, Noah, to Noah. So when Father wiped out the population, Noah's bloodline was the predominant bloodline, and then his sons, which they didn't have. Well, let me just get to that. Our ancestors were biological brothers of the same mother and father. There's been some teachings over the course of my life that individuals have attempted to answer questions about races. And if Noah's sons were the only people on the planet, how did we get all of these different races from three individuals who came from the same father and mother? And a lot of that has to do with migration, climate, culture, because once we get further down the road, we're going to see that Father did something to where if the people were of all one language, and he confounded the language. By confounding the language, he made it to where people couldn't communicate with one another, so folks found ways to communicate with one another. People begin to communicate, develop communication, and we'll get to that. But the point is that we all trace our origin back to these three brothers, one of these three brothers. In verse 1, Genesis chapter 10. Now, these are the generations of the sons of Ham. The sons of Noah. They're Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. Now, before the flood, everything was destroyed. All humankind was destroyed. And so now sons were born after the flood to these three brothers and their wives. Although the order that the brothers are mentioned in this passage is Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the generational line, as we'll see here in a moment, begins in the reverse order with Japheth. And one explanation theologians give is because the Bible closely followed the descendants of two of these brothers. And we're going to see that a great majority of the Old Testament follow Ham and Shem. Ham and Shem had much in common. And we're going to continually point that out as we go through Genesis. You'll see it. All nations came from these three men. Every tribe, every ethnicity, every race of people originated with these three brothers. As I was looking at some of this, my mind just continued to wander as I'm trying to understand how things happen. How old is the United States? How many years old is the United States of America? Not the land. You see how our minds are? Say what? It's a little older than that. Well, 1776 is when the Constitution was established. But the Constitution was established by individuals who arrived on this. When did the Mayflower come? So if we're going to go, we have to kind of go back to somewhere in that area. But here's the point I'm going to make. Is America 500 years old? United States of America is not 500 years old yet. Now, the first and the history of who really discovered America, there's a difference between who is declared to have discovered America, but America is not named after the person they say discovered America. America's named after somebody else named Amerigo's Vespucius. But he's not the one who actually discovered America. America was discovered earlier by some, they say, Vikings who discovered the land and was here when Americans came and even after Columbus or before Columbus. The point is, though, is Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts is supposed to be the place where individuals first came to this, what they call the New World. Now, from the time they arrived to our time, America has been populated from the east to the west, from north, south, as far north, as far south, as far east, as far west. We have millions and millions and millions of people that have spread across the United States of America in less than 500 years. And I want to show you how quickly men can populate the earth. Because when we look at the sons of Noah and how men spread across the new world, if you would, if we just simply take a quick look at how young America is, one of the youngest nations, and yet the population of America is vast. Let me see. Say what? And diverse. Very diverse. And so now here we see that everything starts with these three brothers, and the account of generation, as we're going to say, the account or generations, it begins with Japheth. The sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. What's interesting about genealogy is it gives us the names of these individuals, but the narrative don't necessarily follow all of the names that are mentioned. It may follow one or two, and in some cases we're going to see that when we connect the genealogy from Adam to Messiah, it follows a very narrow bloodline. And this is interesting. It's important for us to follow because to see, because as we begin to follow the narrative, you begin to see the players or the roles of people that are involved in the narrative, whereas you begin to connect the ethnic connections and the descendants of the brothers, because all of the connections go back to Ham, Shem, or Japheth, then Noah, and then it skips and goes all the way back to Adam. So no genealogy between Noah and Adam, with the exception of from Shem and the thin line between Shem and his descendants all the way down to Noah. If we were doing genealogy and following the genealogy, you'll even see that even from Shem and his children, that it follows a specific person from Shem's bloodline, and then a specific person from Shem's son and Shem's grandson. And that's important to pay attention to, because you'll see how Father began to move and how he used the lineage of an individual. There are two main points, as I said, I want to make in this passage. The first is in relations to what Noah said in the previous chapter. And here's what he said: "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." Now I want to stop here for a moment. I made reference to this. Did Noah bless Shem in that verse? Who did Noah bless? He blessed Jehovah. He said, "Blessed be Jehovah Elohim of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant." But then this next word I got bold and underlined: Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. Now, the way this looks, that we're going to see some maps, and we're going to see how Japheth doesn't necessarily dwell in the tents of Shem during the migration. Japheth goes in a certain direction. Shem and his children go in a certain direction, and Ham and their descendants go in a certain direction. And there's a term in theological circles called the Table of Nations. If you Google the Table of Nations, or if you just so happen to have one of our Bible maps, you'll find that the Table of Nations is actually how the sons of Noah migrated to certain parts of the world after the flood. And you'll see all kinds of maps, and some of the maps are not accurate in their depiction, which is why it's important that when you deal with maps, that you connect it to what is written, because you got individuals who have different views. Like on where the Garden of Eden is. You'll find different maps saying Garden of Eden is here. Another one says the Garden of Eden is there. Another one says the Garden of Eden is there. And it's very difficult to pinpoint because there are certain things that don't exist today that did exist in the time of Noah when it was written. But he says, Elohim shall enlarge Japheth. Now, this, as we noted last week, Noah did not bless Shem, Noah blessed Jehovah, the Elohim of Shem. Noah stated that Japheth would dwell in the tents of Shem and that Canaan would be the servant of Japheth. That's what he said. Noah did something else. He cursed Canaan and blessed Jehovah. Now, when we try to reconcile things that individuals of old did, we know that there were things that were permitted at a certain time in human history that once the earth was populated, they were no longer permitted. And so we are taught today in our Bibles by James that blessings and curses should not come from the same lips. And James seems like he may have been referencing this particular situation, because here's what he says. But the tongue, James chapter 3:8, but the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Now, Noah cursed Canaan as a result of Noah's own action. What did Noah do? He got drunk. Noah got drunk. And when he was drunk, something occurred. We don't know fully what occurred. But Ham saw his father's nakedness. Now, seeing your parent naked is not, in essence, a sin, although some would view it as a sin. When you see the word uncover one's nakedness, now we're getting into forbidden. You see. Did Ham, we don't know what or how that whole circumstance went with how Ham saw. Was Ham walking past and looking? Did Ham just so happen to spot when he walked past? We don't know. But one thing we do know is that he told his brother. He didn't broadcast it to the world. He told his brothers. But at the time, it's like, okay, we know that there was more people than Ham, Shem, and Japheth at the time, because Noah had, Shem, Japheth had a son whom Noah called out by name. And as I talked last week, and as we've been dealing with this subject matter since we started Genesis, there's already these ideas in our head where people feel that they have a perfect understanding of what has happened, because we've heard sermon after sermon after sermon, year after year after year, as different individuals have expounded or attempted to expound on these passages. Therewith, James says, the tongue is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we Elohim. Remember, Noah blessed Elohim. And therewith bless we Elohim, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of Elohim. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Now, this is exactly what Noah did. Noah blessed Elohim, Father, and he cursed men who were made after the image of Father. Now, James comes along, and I can imagine while James is writing this or teaching this, if that's what he believes, somebody questioned James. Well, James, what about Noah? And James is saying here that what Noah did is he blessed the Father, Elohim, and then turned around and cursed man who is made in the image of Elohim out of the same mouth. Some today would say, well, what about David? David told Father, whoever he cursed, David cursed. Paul taught, bless them which persecute you. Bless and curse not. So Paul seems to be not in the same mindset as Noah and David. But then you go further, and this is what Yeshua taught. Yeshua taught, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. It seems as if Yeshua was against cursing people too. But I'll tell you something, when we feel, when we feel that someone has wronged us, when we feel that someone has abused us, there's something within us that justify the behavior or the idea of operating counter to what is taught. There are people who say, well, the Bible says an eye for an eye. And there's some truth to an eye for an eye. But when Yeshua comes along and he says, listen, here's how you want to interpret what the Bible actually say. Because if you seriously want to murder somebody because they murdered somebody in your family, where is that desire coming from? I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's revenge. Some say, well, I'm avenging. Well, you can call it what you want, but you have to ask yourself, what spirit are you operating out of? You see. And this is something we constantly have to try to reconcile, what is written and what is written. And there are places where Yeshua expounds on things that are written, and he wants us to understand the intent of the Almighty when he gave his instructions to people, because up to that point, people had understood it a certain way. See, somebody hit you, you hit them back. Somebody smite you, you smite them back. Somebody steal from you, you cut off their hands. And Yeshua went as far as to say, listen, it's not for somebody to cut off one's hand, it's for you to cut off your own hand. If your hand offends you, you cut it off. If your eye offends you, you pluck it out. So what is he saying? He's saying, listen, you need to take control of yourself and subject and submit yourself to Father's perfect plan. But what about the law, brother? What does that play in? Well, the law still is the law. But understand something. You can operate by the law and not have the spirit of Jehovah. And the law without the spirit, you move into legalism. It's my right. I have every right to do that. And you may very well have a right to do something, but what spirit are you operating and claiming that right from? Because that's what it really boils down to, is what spirit you are operating out of, because in the wrong spirit, you can claim a biblical right and be right according to the law, but wrong according to the spirit. You see. And that's a fine line. And Yeshua was trying to show us and help us how to walk that fine line to where we can be found pleasing with the Almighty without violating his commands. It's a delicate line. It's a delicate balance. Or you could be like some people, throw it all out and only go toward what the Spirit says. Or ignore the Spirit and only stand on what the law says. How would what Noah spoke concerning Japheth, that Jehovah would enlarge the tent of Japheth, or enlarge Japheth, and Japheth shall dwell in the tents of Shem? Now, this is an interesting statement. I mentioned last week that word enlarge in this verse was the Hebrew word meaning to entice. It's only used, that particular word is only used in that verse. Now, enlarge is used several times, but the Hebrew word that is associated with that enlarge is the Hebrew word meaning to entice, to deceive. So it's used to entice, to deceive, to persuade, to flatter, to allure, to enlarge. And it's interesting how that word is used in other places, but not the word enlarge, is deceive. The first son of Japheth is Gomer. Gomer's firstborn is named Ashkenaz. Based on the migration of Noah's sons, Japheth migrated to what is known today as modern Europe. Ashkenaz migrated to what we know today as Poland, Russia, Hungary, and Lithuania. If we were to look at it from a map, and this is where we would have to focus from, the boat, the ark landed where? Somewhere on Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat is in Turkey, modern day Turkey. And then from there, men begin to populate. Now, that burnt orange color is the land that Japheth occupied. That beige, yellowish, or beige, white, beige looking color you'll see in the middle of that, I got Shem. And then that sandy, yellowish, brownish color is where the descendants of Ham migrated. Now, on this map, you can see the boot up to the upper left. That's Italy. And it's hard to tell that what you're looking at is Europe. But you can see there where Shem is what we know today as the Middle East. And left of that, you'll see where that long rectangle, not rectangle, yeah, rectangle, that's a rectangle, where Israel is located. You see that? Can you see it? And then, of course, over to the left is Ham. Now, in the burnt orange, it's hard to see the red. Right under Mount Ararat is the land of Japheth. On a different map, this is a similar, but you can tell Ham is now in the greenish. And so parts of the territory of Shem and upper part of Shem, you will find that the descendants of Ham also dwelled in some of the land of Shem. And then here is a broader map, which shows us Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so the majority of Ham descendants dwelt in Africa and parts of the Middle East, and then Shem, Asia, parts of Asia, but known as the Middle East. And then, of course, Upper Asia, you got, and Europe, you'll find Japheth descendants. And this is going to play out as we go forward. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath. and Togarmah. Now, here's interesting. The majority of the world's Jewish population are Ashkenaz. And of course, it's seemingly associated with Ashkenaz because of where it migrated to. And there's some interesting facts when you start looking at geography and history. And so the majority of the world's Jewish population are Ashkenazim, tracing their ancestry where? To Europe, according to the Canadian Jewish Advocacy. And I put the website where this information is. So the Ashkenazim come from, it traces its ancestry back to Europe. Modern Israel is home to more than 8 million people from a diverse array of ethnic groups, accounting for 75.5% of the population. Jews are the largest Israeli ethnic group in Israel. The Jewish population is comprised of two main segments. One is Ashkenazi, and the other is a mixture of Sephardi and Sephardim, and Mizrahi. Now, the Sephardi and the Mizrahi were the people who continued to occupy the areas surrounding Israel during Babylonia, during captivities and during migrations. So some would even say that the original Israeli, if you would, or the original Hebrew came from these two groups. Of course, when we trace our roots back, we all come from where? Ham, Shem, Japheth. People of Ashkenazi Jewish descent constitute around 47.5% of Israeli Jews, and therefore 35 to 36% of Israelis. They have played a prominent role in the economy, media, and politics of Israel since its founding. In Israel, Sephardic Jews who descend from communities in the Middle East and North Africa account for just over half. So half of the Jewish population are Sephardic and Mizrahi, and oftentimes Mizrahi and Sephardic are confused with one another, but there's a distinct difference between the two. But nevertheless, there's 50% of the Jewish population where the Ashkenazi accounts for about 47%. Now, there is also a small population of Ethiopian Jews, and this is individuals who were brought in by Operation Solomon and other operations over the course of time that brought Ethiopians into Israel. Ashkenazic Jews still dominate leadership roles in public institutions. For much of Israel's history, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews were disproportionately underrepresented in the government, yet now they make up more than half of the population. Israel's first 5 prime ministers were of European descent who were not religious. They were secular Jews called Zionists. And this information is easily accessible, brothers and sisters. It's not something you have to look very hard for. The first prime minister was David Ben-Gurion. What was David Ben-Gurion? In that, his actual name was David Green or Green. He was born in Poland. Now, where were the migration of Ashkenaz? As we saw earlier, we saw that it was Poland, Russia, Hungary, and Lithuania. So the first prime minister of Israel comes from where? Poland. That's historical fact. He was born in Pytański, in Congress, Poland. The second prime minister was Moshe Shertok, who changed his name to Sharit. He was the second prime minister of Israel. And he was born in Palestine, but his parents, it doesn't show us where his parents come from, and I'm sure it's in the archive somewhere. I just didn't go searching deeper. The third prime minister, Levi Yishak Shikolnik, was born in the shtetl of Oratov, Kiev, governorate the Russian Empire, now Orativ Venisty Oblast, Ukraine. So he's Russian. So we've got a Polish prime minister, the second a Palestinian who was born in Palestine before it became Israel prior to 1948, whose parent migrated. And then you have Levi Eshkol, who came from Russia. And then you got Pikovich. Later you got Alon. He was born he's the one who immigrated to Palestine. His father immigrated to Palestine. Golda Meir. Golda Meir was born in Ukraine. And the point is that before it was, I think, Yitzhak Rabin, which was kind of like the sixth prime minister, but the fifth person, because David Ben Gurion was prime minister twice. And so he was prime minister in two different elections. And so Yitzhak Rabin, I believe historically was the first prime minister, the sixth prime minister of Israel that was actually born in Israel. So the point is that all of these prime ministers, where do they come from? They come from the land that Ashkenaz migrated to, which was Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and where else was it? It wasn't Ukraine. Hungary. But understand something, that Russia and Ukraine at one time was one. The Soviet Union. They controlled all of that land that now, and even today, under the current president of Russia, he's still trying to annex Ukraine back. trying to bring Ukraine back in the fold. Remember during what was that? When they invaded a very popular site. My mind slips me right now, but it was about 5 years ago, and the president at the time was Barack Obama. They sanctioned Vladimir Russians for annexing Crimea. It was Crimea. They just took it back, and the Ukrainian president sought exile in Russia, and so they still have some of this tension. But this is history, and when we understand history, we can begin to better connect the dots, even from a biblical perspective. The second point I want to make is that the first time the term Gentile is used in the Bible, it is associated with the line of Japheth. Now, the term Gentile is actually the term Gentile, where in other places the word nation is Gentile, but the use of the word Gentile specifically is associated with Japheth. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their land. And so it seems what the writer is trying to do in different versions of the Bible. How many of you have Gentile in your Genesis chapter 10, verse 5? Gentile, what do you got? Now I know in some versions it may have nation, but in many, what version are you reading from? King James? What version are you reading from, brother officer? King James? What are you reading from? New King James, what does it say? Gentiles. Most versions it has Gentiles, some versions it has nations. But it's specific. Now, the word there is the Hebrew word where we get the word goy. And the word Gentile is where the Hebrew word goy originates. And that's as far as I want to go here tonight. We'll deal with Founding Fathers Part 2 next week in talking about Ham. Shalom, saints. Tithing and giving first fruit offerings are critical parts of the believer's faith and has its foundation back in Genesis 4:4, when Abel brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And Jehovah had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Abel was commended by Jehovah in Hebrews 11:4, where it states that by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Solomon said in Proverbs 3:9-10, honor Jehovah with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. So shall your barns be filled with plenty, and your presses shall burst out with new wine. The prophet Malachi wrote in chapter 3, verse 11 and 12, to bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house, and prove me now herewith, says Jehovah of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there should not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, says Jehovah of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a delightsome land, saith Jehovah of hosts. When we tithe and give offerings consistently in obedience to Jehovah's commandments, we can count on him to keep his promises to us and consistently meet all of our needs. It is our Father's desire to bless you. However, it begins with you and your act of obedience to tithe and give offerings. Do it today. Shalom.
For more information, visit www.arthurbaileyministries.com or call 888-899-1479. House of Israel International Services is made possible through financial contributions from brothers and sisters like you. Thank you.